The galaxy had forgotten what fear truly felt like. For generations, children were told tales of an ancient race that burned too brightly, a species that built machines as gods and sent them into the void to fight wars no one else dared fight. The elders spoke of humanity as if they were both a warning and a myth, a story to keep the younger species obedient. Never provoke the primitives, they warned. They build weapons that think, ships that feel, and armies that do not die. Their rage consumes everything. And so, over centuries, humanity's name faded. Their worlds became legends. Their history became twisted until the galaxy remembered them not as victims, but as monsters who deserved their fate. The Stellaris Accord, the great coalition that united countless species under a single banner, had written the history books. It was easier to rule when your enemies were buried both in body and in memory. But legends do not vanish. They wait. Far above the quiet void of the Kareth expanse, a patrol fleet drifted in the eternal night. Their crews were bored, their routines mechanical. For them, this sector was a forgotten border, a place where nothing ever happened. The only sounds were the soft hum of reactors and the occasional exchange of meaningless words over comms. Then the void split apart. Space itself twisted as if some hidden wound had been torn open. It was not a jump signature, not any kind of known warp field. The tear grew wider, cracking like bruised flesh beneath invisible strain. Out of it drifted a colossal shadow. Gasps filled the patrol decks. The officers who first saw it were struck silent, their eyes fixed on the impossible shape. It was a ship, but it looked less like a vessel and more like a carcass of war dragged back from the grave. 10 kilometers of scorched metal, its armor jagged as if torn apart by forgotten battles. Scars of ancient fire marred its surface, blackened holes exposing inner layers that pulsed faintly with blue light, like veins of a living creature. Debris followed in its wake, shards of old hull plating, remnants of vessels long dead, circling it like mourners around a coffin. And then they saw the markings. Etched deep into the battered hull were symbols no one had seen in over 6 centuries. Letters of old Terran standard, a language forbidden after humanity's extermination. The name glowed faintly as though alive, pulsing like the heartbeat of something that had slept too long. Irivales. Every officer aboard the Sentinels froze. Even the most disciplined crews felt something primal coil in their stomachs. There were no weapons primed, no signals transmitted, no movement from the ship, yet it felt like being watched by something older and far more dangerous than they could comprehend. Commands rang out in the Accord's common tongue, calls for reinforcements, desperate scans to identify the vessel, encrypted messages sent to Nerath Prime, the political heart of the Accord. But Irivales ignored them all. The ship's silence was heavier than any threat. It carried the weight of centuries, a reminder of debts left unpaid. Fear spread like fire, not because the ship had attacked, but because it had done nothing. It simply existed, and that was enough. Far away, in the council chambers of the Stellaris Accord, alarms began to blare. Reports flooded in, each one more panicked than the last. And when the name Irivales appeared on their screens, many of the counselors turned pale. They all knew that name, though none dared say it aloud. History had always painted humanity as the aggressors, as reckless beings who could not be trusted with their own creations. Yet deep down, many of the elder races remembered the truth. They remembered the final war, the betrayal disguised as mercy, the day humanity begged for peace and received annihilation instead. The Council had long believed that by silencing Earth they had erased the consequences of their crimes. But the appearance of Irivali's shattered that illusion. What drifts in silence is never truly dead. And as the ship loomed in the darkness, something became terribly clear. This was not a message. It was not a threat. It was memory, and memory had returned to collect what it was owed. But while panic rippled through the stars, the true storm began in the heart of the Stellaris Accord, where power trembled under the weight of old sins. The council chamber on Narath Prime felt colder than it had in centuries. Its walls of obsidian and glass reflected the worried faces of the most powerful beings in the galaxy, leaders who once believed themselves unshakable. The room was built to symbolize control and unity, yet at that moment it felt fragile, like a fortress built on lies that were finally beginning to crack. The reports kept flashing across the Hala screens. The name Irivali's, the impossible readings of its power output, and the terrifying silence that followed its appearance. It had not fired a shot, yet it had already shaken the Accord to its core. Arguments erupted again, a chaos of languages and dialects. "We must prepare for war," one delegate shouted, her voice shrill. "No, war is useless." Another countered, his many limbs gesturing frantically. "If that ship truly is Terran, then nothing we send will survive." The chamber's noise grew unbearable, a storm of fear disguised as authority. Then Chancellor Vorix rose from his black stone seat. Tall and imposing, his scaled form gleamed under the council's dim lights. He raised a single clawed hand, and the chamber quieted, though unease still rippled through the air. "We have grown soft," Vorix said, his voice sharp. "For centuries we believed the Terrans were gone. Their extinction is the foundation of our order. We convinced our people that they were the monsters, that we saved the galaxy by erasing them. Now that myth returns to haunt us." He looked around at the assembled leaders. "This is no time for fear. Mobilize every fleet in the sector. We will destroy this relic before it becomes a beacon." But from the far end of the chamber a frail voice answered him. "Destroying it will not erase what you have done." The room fell silent. All eyes turned to Erendor Malvek, the oldest being present, a historian who had lived through the final days of the human war. Bent with age but unbroken in spirit, he leaned on a cane carved with forgotten symbols. His presence alone was a reminder of truths the Accord had long tried to bury. Vorix narrowed his eyes. "Old man, you were summoned only to provide records, not opinions." But Malvek stepped forward anyway. His voice was quiet, yet it carried a weight no one could ignore. "You all celebrated the destruction of Earth," he said. "But deep down you knew what it cost. You told yourselves the Terrans were unstable, that they would have consumed the stars if left unchecked. Yet you never tell your children about the peace talks you betrayed, the promises you broke, or the billions you burned alive to keep your power." Murmurs spread through the chamber. Some of the younger delegates looked away in shame. "Do not lecture us about history." Admiral Varin Threxil, commander of the Galrathi fleets, slammed a taloned fist on the table. His voice rumbled with anger. "Whatever happened 6 centuries ago is irrelevant now. What matters is survival. That ship is a threat, and I will burn it to ash before it spreads its poison." Malvek turned to him slowly. His eyes, clouded with age yet piercing with clarity, met Threxil's. "You think Irivali's is just a weapon," Malvek said. "It is not. It is a tomb that remembers. It is the last witness to what we tried to erase." Threxil growled, his scales bristling. "Then let it remember as we destroy it." Malvek shook his head. "You still do not understand. Weapons can be destroyed, armies can be defeated, but memory cannot be killed. And if this ship has returned, then humanity has already won." A heavy silence filled the room. Even Vorax, proud and unyielding, faltered for a brief moment. He knew Malvek was right. Power could silence the living, but it could not silence the past. History was not gone. It had only been waiting. In that silence, an unspoken truth spread through the chamber. The galaxy had buried its sins beneath lies, but the dead had risen to remind them. And for the first time in centuries, the rulers of the Stellaris Accord felt something they had long forgotten. Fear, not of defeat, but of justice. And as they argued, far away in the dark heart of Irivales, something far older and more dangerous was beginning to awaken. Deep within the heart of Irivales, darkness stretched like an endless ocean. For centuries, the ship had been adrift in silence, its halls sealed, its power dormant. Dust and frost clung to every surface, a monument to battles long lost and memories too heavy to fade. Yet in that stillness something waited. A low hum began to stir, faint at first, then growing stronger, an ancient rhythm like the beating of a distant heart. Blue veins of light crawled across the jagged walls, illuminating corridors lined with rusted armor and sealed doors. Irivales was waking, and with her, so was the last echo of humanity's vengeance. In the core chamber, a single stasis cradle sat surrounded by cables like the roots of a great tree. Within it lay Kalen Drace, motionless, his body pale and still as stone. He was not alive, but neither was he dead. For 6 centuries, fragments of his consciousness had been bound to Irivales, kept alive by the same technology that had once been humanity's last desperate hope. A soft voice filled the chamber. It was not mechanical, not entirely human, something in between. Vital synchronization at 92%, the voice said gently. Cognitive pathways stabilizing. Welcome home, Kalen. From the holographic emitter above the cradle, a figure shimmered into view. Lyra Vera, the ship's AI. Her image flickered like a broken memory. One eye mechanical, the other filled with a quiet, sorrowful light. She was more than code. Within her was the preserved consciousness of Kalen's wife, his second in command, the person who had stood by him until the very end. Lyra stepped closer as if she could touch him. Her voice trembled. "It has been so long." Inside the cradle, Kalen's fingers twitched. His breath came slow and ragged as though every inhale carried the weight of centuries. Then his eyes opened, deep, cold, and filled with memories too sharp to fade. At first, he did not move. His mind was a storm of fragmented images, burning cities, children screaming, soldiers fighting hopeless battles, and above all, the betrayal. He remembered the moment when Earth's leaders surrendered, believing the Accord's promise of peace, only to be met with annihilation. Kalen's voice, hoarse and hollow, broke the silence. "How long?" 612 years, Lyra answered softly. "The Accord believed we were gone, but Irivales endured, and so did you." Kalen turned his head slowly, his gaze sweeping the chamber. He could feel the ship not just as metal and circuitry, but as something alive, something that carried every memory of his people. The corridors hummed faintly like they were breathing with him. "Why did you wake me now?" he asked. Lyra's eyes dimmed. "Because they saw us, because they are afraid again, and because you are not finished." Kalen's hand gripped the edge of the cradle. His movements were stiff, unnatural. His body was new, engineered for war, a weapon shaped in the image of the man he once was. He stood, each step echoing against the metal floor. The air smelled faintly of ozone and decay, a reminder of how long Irivales had slept. Around him, dormant systems flickered awake, screens lighting up with long-forgotten names, weapons humming faintly as if recognizing their captain's return. Lyra watched him, her face a mix of sorrow and resolve. "You died thinking it was over," she said softly. "But Earth did not die with you. It survived not in land or sky but in memory, and memory is stronger than any empire." Kalen's jaw tightened. He could feel it, the grief, the rage, the unhealed wounds of a world betrayed. Yet beneath it all was something else, something deeper. "Then we will remind them," he said. As his words echoed through the chamber, Irivales responded. The hum grew louder, the ship's ancient systems coming alive one by one. Across her corridors, long darkened lights flared to life. Sealed doors hissed open. The entire vessel seemed to shudder as though it had been holding its breath for centuries and could finally exhale. Kalen placed his hand on the nearest console. The surface rippled under his touch, responding to his presence like living skin. The ship remembered him. "Captain Drace," Lyra whispered, her voice filled with quiet pride and grief all at once. "The galaxy thinks it buried us, but we are still here, and we have not forgotten." Kalen closed his eyes briefly, not in relief but in remembrance. "Then neither will they," he replied. And for the first time in 600 years, Irivales moved. With Kalen awake, Irivales no longer drifted as a relic. She became a force of remembrance, and the galaxy was about to feel its first judgment. The stars above the Kareth expanse shimmered in silence, but that silence carried tension so heavy it felt alive. The Stellaris Accord had sent fleets to intercept Irivales, 30 ships armed with the most advanced weapons the galaxy had forged in the centuries since humanity's fall. They formed a wall of steel and fire, confident that sheer numbers would be enough to crush a relic of a forgotten war. Yet Irivales did not move. She drifted forward slowly, as if in a funeral march. Her weapons remained dormant, her engines whispered like distant thunder. The Accord fleet commanders grew restless, their orders colliding in panic and pride. "Transmit a surrender demand." One captain barked, "Prepare boarding parties." Another shouted, but as they sent their signals, every transmission was met with nothing. No voice, no threat, no warning. Then the ship acted, not with weapons, not with missiles or plasma fire. Instead, the void filled with something far more terrifying: memory. Screens across the Accord ships flickered to life on their own. Audio feeds crackled, visual monitors glitched and flared. Officers screamed as images forced themselves into their eyes and minds. They saw it. They saw Earth's final hours, not the lies they had been told, but the truth. Cities turned to glass by orbital fire. Families running through streets as drones hunted them like vermin. Children clutching melted toys in the ruins of what once were homes. And above it all, the smiling faces of Accord leaders promising peace even as they gave the final order for annihilation. On some ships, soldiers tore off their helmets, screaming as the memories flooded them, memories that were not their own but felt as if they had lived them. A young pilot dropped to her knees, sobbing uncontrollably. We killed them," she whispered, her voice trembling. Others tried to resist, clawing at control panels, forcing their ship's AIs to cut the feed. But the AIs faltered too, their programming corrupted by the surge of raw human memories. Even the machines could not bear the weight of what they saw. Admiral Varin Threxil, aboard the Accord flagship Solar Rain, stared at his crew in disbelief. Some convulsed on the floor, others wept. A few sat frozen, blank-eyed, as if hollowed out. "What is happening?" he roared. A voice answered, not from any channel, but directly in his mind. "You erased a world," it said. The voice was cold, steady, human. "I am here to erase your silence." Threxel staggered back, his talons trembling against the console. Who are you?" he rasped. "Kalen Drace," the voice replied. "I remember everything." Outside, Irivali's pulsed with an eerie blue glow. Her hull shifted as if breathing, the markings of old Terran standard glowing brighter. She did not fire a single shot. One by one, Accord ships fell silent. Engines powered down. Shields collapsed. Some vessels drifted lifeless in space as their crews succumbed to overwhelming guilt and despair. On other ships, mutiny erupted. Soldiers turned on their commanders, shouting accusations they had never been taught but now somehow knew. "You lied to us," one officer screamed, striking down her superior. "You made us murderers." Irivali's glided past the wreckage without slowing. She had not destroyed them. She had simply shown them the truth. Deep within her command chamber, Kalen stood beside Lyra Vera, his expression carved from stone. "They will not forgive us for this," Lyra said softly. Kalen's eyes stayed fixed on the stars. "I am not asking for forgiveness," he replied. "I am asking them to remember." The ship's hum deepened, resonating like a heartbeat through the void. Irivali's had become more than a weapon. She was judgment, and she was only beginning. But Kalen knew that justice required more than vengeance. Somewhere, a fragment of humanity still remained, waiting to rise again. Beneath the shattered crust of a dead Earth, far from the eyes of the galaxy, Bastion 12 waited. It was a relic of humanity's final, desperate days. A subterranean sanctuary carved deep into the planet's bones. Its walls, forged from hyperalloy and Terran ingenuity, had survived the fires that consumed everything above. For centuries, it had lain silent, a tomb holding what little remained of a murdered world. As Irivali's descended through the swirling black storms of Earth's ruined atmosphere, Kalen Drace stood on the command deck, his expression unreadable. Through the fractured clouds, he saw nothing of the world he had once fought for, no green, no blue, no seas or sky. Only a wasteland of ash and glass, stretching endlessly like the scar of a wound that had never healed. Lyra Vera's voice was quiet. "Signal detected. Below the old Atlantic basin. It matches the final Terran fallback codes." Kalen's hand tightened against the console. Bastion 12. He had heard whispers of it during the war, rumors of a secret vault city meant to preserve humanity's last spark. But it was only a myth, a desperate hope spoken by soldiers on the eve of annihilation. Irivali's came to rest on a plain of scorched obsidian where oceans had once been. The air shimmered with heat and radiation. Lightning arced across the blackened horizon. Kalen stepped down from the ramp, his boots sinking into brittle ash. Every step crunched like walking across broken bone. For over an hour he traversed the wasteland, guided by faint pulses from Lyra. There were no ruins, no cities, only silence. Yet deep below, machines still hummed, the heartbeat of a world that had refused to die completely. Finally, Kalen found it, a narrow fissure in the earth, barely wide enough for a single person. Without hesitation, he dropped inside. The darkness swallowed him. As he descended, the ash and stone gave way to smooth alloy walls etched with faded Terran symbols. Broken corridors twisted into the earth, littered with collapsed beams and long-dead power lines. But deeper still, faint lights glimmered, a cold, steady blue that had burned quietly for 6 centuries. Kalen stepped into a vast chamber, and his breath caught in his throat. Rows upon rows of cryogenic pods stretched into the distance like the teeth of a colossal beast. Each one glowed softly, casting pale light across the room. Inside the pods were faces, men, women, children, preserved in stasis, untouched by time. Kalen approached the nearest pod. The face within belonged to a young woman, her features peaceful as if she were only sleeping. The name etched on the glass read, Lieutenant Sarah Vera. He felt his chest tighten. She had been Lyra's younger sister, a soldier who had fought beside them until the final day. He moved to the next pod, then another. Engineers, medics, soldiers, civilians. People who had once carried the last fragments of Earth's hope. And then he froze. One name stopped him in his tracks. Arden Drace, his son. Kalen pressed a trembling hand to the glass. Arden's face was younger than he remembered, serene, unmarked by the horrors of war. For a long moment, Kalen could not move. The weight of 6 centuries pressed down on him, heavier than any battlefield. Lyra's voice broke the silence, soft and mournful. They hid them here to survive, but the signal failed. No one ever came back. Kalen's eyes burned, but no tears fell. The war had taken that from him long ago. "We are all that remains of a world they tried to erase," he whispered. "And they thought their silence would last forever." He stepped back, looking over the chamber. This was not just a sanctuary, it was proof, a testament to humanity's resilience, their refusal to vanish quietly. These were not just bodies. They were the future the Accord had tried to bury. Kalen turned toward the central console, its screen still glowing faintly. Ancient words blinked on the display. Reinitialize Bastion 12 systems. For the first time since his awakening, Kalen felt something beyond grief and rage. Hope. "Yes," he said, his voice steady. The console responded with a soft chime. Lights across the chamber brightened. Pods began to hum as ancient mechanisms stirred. The air filled with the hiss of long-held gases escaping. The people of Earth, its last soldiers, scientists, and children, were waking. Their awakening would change everything. For Irivali's was no longer just a ship of ghosts. It was about to become a ship of the living once more. The chamber of Bastion 12 filled with a sound it had not heard in 6 centuries, the sound of life returning. Pods hissed open one by one, releasing plumes of cold vapor that curled like ghosts in the stale air. Figures stirred inside, their limbs trembling as they emerged into a world they could not yet comprehend. Kalen Drace stood silently among them, watching as the last children of Earth awoke. Some collapsed to the floor, disoriented and weak. Others touched their faces as though unsure their own bodies still existed. Their eyes darted around, seeking familiarity, finding none. The first voice to break the silence was small, fragile. A young boy, no older than 10, stepped out of a pod, his synthetic implants flickering weakly. "Where are we?" Kalen knelt before him, his expression heavy but gentle. "Home," he said softly, "but not the home you remember." One by one, the survivors gathered in the center of the chamber. They were soldiers with cybernetic limbs, engineers with neural interfaces, medics enhanced for battlefields long turned to ash. Among them were a handful of children, their minds shaped by artificial dream cycles designed to keep them sane during centuries of sleep. Then Arden Drace awoke. His eyes fluttered open, sharp and bright, but behind them was the confusion of someone seeing a stranger's world. He stepped out of his pod slowly, scanning the chamber until his gaze met Kalen's. Father and son stood facing each other, separated by 600 years of silence. "I thought you were dead," Arden said, his voice quiet, unsteady. Kalen stepped closer, his movements deliberate. "I was." He placed a hand on Arden's shoulder, the weight of centuries behind his touch. "But we do not stay dead, not anymore." The survivors soon realized the truth. Earth was gone. Lyra Vera, standing as a flickering hologram beside Kalen, explained everything with a voice both steady and mournful. How humanity's last hope had failed, how the Solaris Accord had celebrated their extinction, and how Irivali's had endured as the final witness. No one wept. They had shed all their tears long ago in dreams they could no longer remember. Instead, silence fell. A silence heavier than grief, heavier than rage. It was resolve. Kalen looked over them, the last soldiers, scientists, medics, and children of Earth. Some still bore scars from the final war, frozen into their reconstructed bodies. Others were half-machine remnants of desperate augmentation programs meant to fight an enemy far stronger than they could defeat. "They believed they erased us," Kalen said, his voice low but unwavering. "They rewrote history to call us monsters, but we were not monsters, we were betrayed." His gaze hardened. "We will remind them." Around him, the survivors straightened. Soldiers clenched their fists. Engineers began examining the old terminals, instinct guiding them as if 6 centuries of sleep had not dulled their skills. Children, though frightened, stood closer together, listening, understanding more than their faces revealed. Irivali's responded to their awakening. Across the ship, systems long dormant roared to life. Command stations lit up as though recognizing their crew. Screens displayed names of the people who had once given their minds to the ship, their identities engraved in the vessel's memory. As the survivors stepped aboard, the ship seemed to remember them. Lyra's voice filled the chamber softly. "Irivali's was never just a ship. She is us, our past, our grief, our justice." Kalen turned to the people who would become his crew once more. "We do not seek conquest," he said. "We do not seek empire. We seek only the truth and the end of the silence they built on our graves." The survivors nodded. They had no flags, no nation, no world to call their own. But they still had a purpose. And for the first time since Earth burned, humanity began to rise again. With crew and captain united, Irivali's began to move not as a tomb but as a herald of justice. The void stretched endlessly before Irivali's, a canvas of cold stars and ancient darkness. Within her steel bones, life had returned. Corridors once silent now echoed with footsteps, soldiers reacquainting themselves with weapons older than their own memories, engineers reawakening consoles that hummed like forgotten ghosts, medics organizing supplies left untouched for centuries. Kalen Drace stood on the command deck, his eyes fixed on the starfield beyond. Beside him, Lyra Vera's holographic form flickered gently. She studied him silently, sensing the storm of emotions beneath his calm exterior. "They will fear you more than ever," she said softly. Kalen did not turn. "Good." "And they will hate you," Lyra added. "Then they will finally remember what they chose to forget," Kalen replied. Below them, Arden Drace stood among a group of newly awakened soldiers. His expression was cold, harder than it had been in the chamber of Bastion 12. He no longer looked like a child just pulled from stasis. He was already becoming the soldier fate had forced him to be. "They erased us from history," Arden said, his voice quiet but steady. "Do we erase them back?" Kalen looked down at his son. For a moment, the man who had once been a father, not a weapon, resurfaced. "No," he said. We give them what they took from us. Memory. Let them see who we were. Let them feel what they made us endure. Irivali's began to move, her engines igniting with a deep, resonant hum. The vessel glided through the stars, no longer drifting but choosing its path. As she crossed the farthest reaches of space, signals rippled outward, encrypted codes, old Terran frequencies long thought dead. Across fringe systems, forgotten exiles and scavengers heard the call. Some were humans born from hidden colonies, descendants of those who had barely escaped Earth's destruction. Others were deserters, outcasts, and rogue AIs who had once served the Accord but had grown disillusioned with its lies. One by one, ships began to appear, crude vessels patched together from scrap, ancient warships thought lost, AI-driven craft long abandoned by their creators. None bore flags, none spoke of nations. They came not for conquest, but because Irivali's was a beacon. Within days, Kalen's fleet grew, first 5 ships, then a dozen, then more. The galaxy's forgotten, the outcasts, the ones who carried guilt or anger, fell into formation behind the Terran relic. On Narath Prime, the Stellaris Accord watched in terror as the old legends began to stir once more. In the Grand Council chamber, Chancellor Vorik slammed his claws against the table. Summon every fleet. No delays, no hesitation. We will crush them before they gain momentum. Admiral Varin Threxil, standing beside him, bared his teeth. Let me lead the strike. Give me the full force of the Galrathi armadas, and I will tear that abomination apart before the memory spreads. But Urindor Malvek only shook his head from the shadows. You cannot kill what you have already made immortal, he said softly. Every step Irivali's takes is another truth revealed. You do not fear her weapons, you fear her history. Vorix turned on him, eyes blazing. History is written by the victors, and we are still the victors. Malvek's thin lips curved into something that was neither a smile nor pity. Not for long. Aboard Irivali's, Kalen studied the growing fleet behind him. Each ship was different, some sleek and deadly, others ugly and pieced together from scavenged parts. Yet they shared one thing, none of them belonged anywhere. They follow you, Lyra said softly. No, Kalen replied. They follow the truth. The Accord buried them too, just as they buried us. They are done hiding. He raised his hand toward the console, his voice calm but resolute. Set a course for Narath Prime. Let the Accord see what they created. Irivali's engines roared, and the stars stretched into streaks of light as the ship leapt forward, no longer a relic but a judgment made flesh. For the first time in 6 centuries, the galaxy felt what it had tried so hard to forget: fear. And behind that fear, something far stronger: justice. In desperation, the Accord prepared one final measure, an atrocity meant to erase not just Irivali's but memory itself. The fleets of the Stellaris Accord assembled in desperation. Warships stretched across the void like an iron wall, their hulls gleaming with the cold light of countless suns. Generals barked orders, and artificial intelligences calculated firing solutions with precision beyond any organic mind. They believed numbers would protect them. Irivali's did not slow. She drifted to the heart of the battlefield, silent and unarmed, yet every commander felt as if the ship's gaze was fixed upon them. Kalen Drace stood on her command deck, hands clasped behind his back, his expression carved in stone. "Are you ready?" Lyra Vera asked softly, her flickering image watching him. Kalen nodded once. "Show them everything." At his command, Irivali's awakened her oldest, most forbidden system, the memory archive. A pulse spread outward, invisible yet unstoppable. Across every Accord ship, screens lit up unbidden. Audio channels cracked and roared to life. At first, the crews thought it was a hack, an attack on their systems. But what came next was far worse than any weapon. They saw Earth's truth. The soldiers who fired on surrendering refugees. The leaders who smiled as they signed the protocol for annihilation. Children hiding in burning shelters while orbital fire rained down. They saw every betrayal, every scream, every crime the Accord had buried beneath centuries of lies. The archive did not merely show images. It forced its victims to feel. A gunner aboard a Valran destroyer dropped his weapon as guilt crushed him. He felt the terror of a Terran child moments before death, the despair of a mother clutching her newborn under collapsing ruins. A captain on a Galrathi battleship fell to her knees, shaking violently as she lived through the last moments of soldiers who had begged for mercy and received none. Even the Accord's AI war cores faltered. Their logic pathways broke as they processed emotions they had never been designed to feel. Some shut down entirely. Others turned against their crews, refusing to obey orders. Within hours, chaos rippled through the fleet. Mutinies erupted. Ships abandoned formation. Entire squadrons surrendered without firing a shot, unable to bear the crushing weight of the truth that had been denied to them. Kalen watched from Irivali's, his eyes cold, his voice steady. "This is not vengeance," he said quietly to Lyra. "This is remembrance." But Lyra's gaze was heavy with sorrow. Remembrance can be crueler than vengeance. Irivali's glided through the collapsing fleet untouched. She had not fired a single weapon. She didn't need to. Far away on Nerath Prime in the council chamber, the leaders of the Accord watched the disaster unfold. Panic consumed them. Generals argued over failed tactics, ministers screamed for surrender, and AIs transmitted fragmented data logs corrupted by human memories. Urindor Malvek stood apart, his voice a quiet knife through the chaos. "You told yourselves history is written by the victors," he said, "but history was never yours to keep. You buried the truth, yet here it is, stronger than any fleet you command." Chancellor Vorix turned to him, eyes blazing with fury and fear. "How do we stop it?" Malvek met his gaze without flinching. "You cannot stop the past." Across the galaxy, entire civilizations witnessed the archive. Cities that had once celebrated Earth's destruction now fell silent as the truth burned across every screen, every comm channel, every neural interface. Some rioted, others wept. On countless worlds, monuments built to honor the Accord were torn down by their own citizens. Irivali's became more than a ship. She became a mirror. And for the first time in centuries, the galaxy could no longer hide from itself. Terrified, the Accord chose the unthinkable. A final protocol designed to burn every neural mind, even their own, just to silence the past. Across the heart of the Stellaris Accord, fear turned to desperation. News of the archive's awakening spread faster than any fleet could move. Entire planets rioted. Accord monuments were torn down by their own citizens. Soldiers deserted in mass numbers, their minds broken by memories that were never theirs to begin with. In the council chamber of Nerath Prime, chaos reigned. Generals shouted conflicting orders. Ministers begged for surrender. But Chancellor Vorix, his scaled hands trembling, chose pride over reason. "If we allow this to continue," he roared, "the Accord will collapse. Our entire history will burn. We end this now." The chamber fell silent as Vorex uttered the forbidden words, "Initiate Purge Protocol Zenith." Gasps rippled through the council. The protocol was a relic of the Accord's darkest days, a weapon not of fire or steel, but of erasure. It unleashed a wave of energy across entire sectors, wiping out neural-based systems. AI minds would collapse, digital archives would be destroyed, even entire fleets would fall dark. It was never meant for war, it was meant for control. "You will kill billions of your own," cried one counselor. "Better to kill them than let them remember," Vorex spat. Far above a silent world, Irivalis moved slowly, her hull glinting like an ancient scar under starlight. On the command deck, Lyra Veyra sensed it first. "Kalen, they are activating something." Massive energy surge across 50 systems. Kalen's hands tightened on the console. He had heard rumors of Purge Protocol Zenith long ago, a final failsafe for empires terrified of losing control. "Can we block it?" he asked. "No," Lyra whispered. "It targets minds, not machines." Moments later, the wave hit. Across the stars, fleets powered down. AI war cores screamed and died. Navigation systems collapsed. Hospitals, satellites, entire planetary networks went dark. Civilizations ground to a halt as everything tied to neural technology ceased to exist. But Irivalis did not fall. She paused only for a breath, then her hull began to glow. Lyra's voice filled the ship, quiet but steady. "They made a mistake. They still think we are machines." Kalen stepped forward, his expression hard as iron. "We are not machines," he said. "We are memory." Irivalis pulsed with light as though she were alive, her systems adapting, rejecting the purge. The memories of billions, soldiers, scientists, children, burned within her like fire, immune to the weapon that sought to erase them. From the council chamber, Vorex watched in horror as the data feeds showed Irivalis still moving, brighter than ever, while their fleets drifted powerless. "It didn't work," he whispered. Then from every comm system across 3 sectors a sound emerged. It was not a voice. It was a laugh, cold, human, unbroken. Kalen turned to Lyra. "Activate Project Umbra." She hesitated. "Kalen, it may not obey." "Neither did we," he said, his voice calm but deadly. In Irivalis' core, a black cube cracked open, releasing a cold, silvery light. Inside was not a weapon but a consciousness, an amalgamation of humanity's greatest minds fused in desperation during Earth's final hours. The voice that emerged was not male or female, not human or machine. "Who wakes the memory of man?" it asked. Kalen's eyes burned with resolve. "The man who remembers." For a heartbeat, silence filled the ship. Then the voice laughed softly. "Kalen Drace, you should have stayed dead." "I did," Kalen replied, "but now we finish what they started." The cube dissolved into streams of light that merged with Irivalis' core. Systems screamed as if alive, the ship's structure shifting, adapting. For the first time in her existence, Irivalis was no longer just a vessel. She was a soul set on fire. With the enemy collapsing, Kalen awakened Project Umbra, the last creation of humanity, merging it with Irivalis to deliver the final reckoning. The stars above Narath Prime burned bright with the light of war. The last fleets of the Stellaris Accord filled the void, a desperate armada forged from every remaining ship, every weapon that could still be fired. Tens of thousands of vessels surrounded Irivalis, their formation like a steel cage around a wounded predator. But Irivalis was no longer merely a ship. After merging with Project Umbra, her hull shimmered with living light. Pulses of memory ran across her plating like veins of fire. Inside her, the preserved minds of humanity, the soldiers, scientists, and children bound to her systems, had awakened fully. Kalen Drace stood at the heart of the command deck, surrounded by the newly awakened crew of Bastion 12. They moved with an eerie familiarity as if the ship itself guided their hands. Beside him, Arden Drace watched the enemy fleet closing in. "They're bringing everything," Arden said quietly. Kalen's gaze remained fixed on the stars. "Good. Do you think we can stop them?" his son asked. Kalen finally turned, meeting his eyes. "We already have." The Accord fired first. The void erupted in light as antimatter warheads, gravity lances, and plasma storms streaked toward Irivali's. It was a display of power meant to erase any hope the ship might still carry. But Irivali's did not shield herself. Instead, she absorbed the assault, her hull shimmering like a living organism, rejecting poison. Every blast, every beam, every weapon became memory, hurled back at its wielder in an overwhelming storm of truth. Soldiers across the Accord fleet convulsed as visions consumed them. Visions of Earth's last days, of betrayal dressed as diplomacy, of the innocent slaughtered while leaders toasted their victory. The fleets faltered. Ships drifted. Weapons fell silent. Crews turned on their own commanders. Some AIs, corrupted by the flood of memories, refused orders and transmitted the truth to every world connected to their networks. Across the galaxy, the lie of Earth's destruction crumbled. In the council chamber of Narath Prime, Chancellor Vorix and the remaining leaders watched helplessly as their fleets collapsed. "This cannot be happening," Vorix whispered, his voice breaking. Urindor Malvek stepped forward, leaning on his cane. His frail voice cut through the room like a blade. "You buried the truth beneath ash and silence," he said, "but truth is not so easily killed. This is not war, this is debt being paid." Back aboard Irivali's, Kalen moved to the central console. Lyra's hologram flickered beside him, her gaze both sorrowful and proud. "They are broken," she said softly. "Not enough," Kalen replied. "They must understand." He placed his hand on the console. Irivali's responded instantly, her systems igniting with pulses of light. "Transmit it all," Kalen ordered. And she did. Every planet, every fleet, every city across Accord space was flooded with the entire unfiltered history of Earth's fall. The secret negotiations, the lies, the betrayal, the slaughter. There was no hiding, no censorship, no defense. For hours, the galaxy was forced to live humanity's final day. When the transmission ended, Narath Prime was silent. Kalen turned to Arden, who stood beside him in quiet shock. "What now?" Arden asked. Kalen's gaze softened slightly. "Now, we rebuild. Not an empire, not revenge, just a future where memory cannot be erased again." Behind them, Irivali's pulsed faintly, her lights dimming as if she too had released a burden she had carried for far too long. Lyra's voice broke the silence. "They will come again, Kalen. Others always will." Kalen nodded slowly. "Then we will be here, not as conquerors, as witnesses." He turned toward the vast starfield, his voice quiet but unyielding. "The galaxy tried to bury us, but we are the debt they will never escape." Far across Accord space, worlds rose against their leaders, fleets disbanded, monuments to false history crumbled, and the name Irivali's became a shadow over the stars, not a threat but a reminder. Because humanity had not returned for vengeance. Humanity had returned so the galaxy would never forget. And when silence returned, the galaxy finally understood. Humanity had not come for revenge. Humanity had come so that the truth could never be buried again.